I'm Dan Tucker. I'm here with my boat Mahi Mahi.
And I'm Matt Tucker. So Dan and I built Mahi Mahi in 2006, designed from a traditional Marshallese proa. I was on sort of a working holiday in Tasmania at the time because my parents had moved here, and I decided that I wanted an interesting way to sail home, or to get home to New Zealand. So I thought, what if I built a boat? And then one of our other brothers suggested maybe a proa. At the time, I remember having seen them as a kid and knew about them, but I hadn't really thought much about that as an option. And I looked further into it and just discovered how interesting and unique the boats were. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go, and I called Dan up and roped him in. And so he came over from New Zealand and we started building. Most of the Pacific Islands had their own version of a proa, and they're all sort of very, very similar, but had their own distinctive cultural sort of identifications and ways they did things. So we decided on the Marshallese version because we liked the look of it.
Also, they were quite big, so they were much larger and more seaworthy, whereas a lot of the other ones were smaller for atoll cruising or fishing and stuff like that.
We did grow up sailing around the South Pacific on our family yacht, so we've been to a lot of the Pacific Islands, seen their culture and seen other proas, and that's sort of one of the things that drew us to the type of boat.
So she's 30 foot long, so that's about 9 metres and 6 metres wide. So relatively big platform, but as far as the hulls and everything else, she's quite a small boat. So the great thing about, or like the unusual thing about the proas, is they don't have a front and a back like a conventional boat. So they don't tack into the wind, they actually reverse direction and take off in the opposite direction. So the outrigger is your ballast and it's always upwind. So that's pivoting up, but it means both ends have to be identical, and the sail actually has to swap from one end of the boat to the other end of the boat. And you let the sail out, so it's just flapping. Then you go from what was the stern to the bow, and then pull the sail in, and as you're pulling the sail in, just take off in the opposite direction. So you come to a complete standstill, and then take off again.
Kind of like the Sydney ferries, but in yacht form. Just backwards and forwards.
Yeah, and the great advantage of it is it means the main hull can be asymmetrical, so they invented that. It's a wing shape, and you really notice it when you're motoring, because she just crab claws up. It just, the way that the wing shape makes, it just crab claws up. So when you're sailing, that also helps, because you're going into the wind, you're getting lift from that.
So we left Hobart in early April I think it was, and we got about 3 days in, and we got 30 miles off the coast of St Helens, and we had a structural fault in the armour, which is the outrigger, and had to turn around. So that had actually started sinking on us. So we managed to sail into St Helens Heads with the armour completely underwater.
It wasn't
still just floating.
Floating still, luckily.
And then
close.
Marine Rescue came out and just towed us into the heads. So yeah, that kind of ended the trip. But we learnt a huge amount about how the boat behaved in bigger seas, because we did encounter some pretty big steep seas. And then we also learnt what we did wrong structurally, and how it differed from the traditional method was what went wrong. So we actually kind of backtracked a bit and looked at the way they did it and why they did it that way, and ended up changing it. So it was all kind of a learning process.
Where the beam mounts are, often they're slotted in rather than we had them sticking up and then lashed on. That's really the main differences. Yeah, I mean, what was lucky, everyone said, oh, it's all lashed together, it's going to fall apart. It was the lashings that kept it. If we'd bolted it all on, it probably would have come loose on us.
It definitely would have come on.
Yeah, but because it was lashed all underneath it and everything else, that kept it all together. So we found out the lashing system was definitely the way to go. You know, it was unfortunate, but it wasn't too much of a disaster. I love the look. Like, she's a great looking boat. She's just, I think the proportions, everything sort of worked out with the balance. Sailing, absolutely incredible, because fast. Because you've got the outrigger as your balance, you're out there on that side, and it's just sort of lifting up out of the water, and she's just taking off. It's a really great feeling.
Unlike most yachts, when you do change direction, you don't have to change sides. So you can have your coffee out there or your beer or whatever, as you're sailing, and you just put it down, play with some ropes, pick it up again. And I've sold my half of the boat to Dan quite a few years ago, and moved on to a more modern version of the same style. So more adapting modern racing trimarans and catamarans to this proa concept. So that's my current project. So I've got a 26-foot prototype called UFO. Had her for about 3 or 4 years. So experimenting with different rigs and different rudder setups and all the different kind of balance factors that go into a proa that make it so interesting and unique. There's a lot of lessons to learn, but it's all doable. There's nothing that's sort of insurmountable or particularly hard about it. You've just got to learn how different it is and the intricacies and how it all works. So I've sort of gotten to the point where I'm pretty confident now where I can go out, and even if, like Dan was saying, I get caught aback with the wind on the wrong side, I know how to manage that with my boat. I know how to sort of deal with all those issues. So it's just learning and working it out, and that does take time.